You're listening to IRN, the Inception Radio Network, Chicago, Illinois.
The Extraordinary Phenomenon Investigations Council presents Epic Voyages. Come join us as we enter and experience the great mysteries of the world with tonight's host,
Carol Carl and Bill Forte.
Too much to learn, you say. Cover up is fine, that's your plan, not mine. I'm ready to be told. Secrets to unfold. It's our time to come of age. Time for truth to turn the page. They wanna be inside the dark, live within a question mark. Are they a friend or foe? Tell me now. You need to know. Need to know.
Good evening, everyone, and welcome back to Epic Voyages Radio on Inception Radio Network. My name is Bill Forte, and I will be your host tonight.
And I'm your host, your co-host, Carol Carl.
Okay, before we begin the show, I'd like to remind our listeners that you can listen to Epic Voyages Radio every Monday night on Inception Radio Network, beginning at 9 p.m. Eastern Time. And Epic Voyages Radio is also rebroadcast on darkmatterradio.net on Fridays at 8 p.m. Eastern Time.
And Epic Voyagers has recently added several guest hosts to our lineup, including us. And what a roster of topics and guests we have coming up. Be sure to go to epicvoyagers.com at least weekly and look at our schedule for topics and guests. You'll definitely want to mark Monday nights on Inception Radio and Friday nights on Dark Matter Radio Network so that you don't make any missings of that action. Coming up in just the next few weeks, we're going to be talking to some big names about some amazing topics. There'll be Ted Peters and his book, UFOs, God's Chariots. Len Kasten and his book, Secret Journey to Planet Serpo. John Greenwald will come on and talk about his site, The Black Vault. And Ray Hernandez with the Foundation for Research into Extraterrestrial Encounters, or FREE. And all these shows are going to be archived at Inception Radio Network and also on Epic Voyagers YouTube channel. So if you miss one, we got you covered.
And you can also ask questions for our guests at the Inception Radio Network chat room. Just be sure to put them in caps so that Carol and I can spot them easier. You can also call in with any questions for our guests at 888-919-2355. Okay, tonight, our guest will be Louis Buff Parry, and his website is louisbuffparry.com. That's LOUISBUFFPARRY.com. And we are announcing the premiere of his new YouTube channel tonight, which is called Truth in the Buff. Right now, he has 2 videos posted for viewing, and they are called Oak Island Confessions and Omissions, Part 1 and 2. So go check that out after the show.
Sounds like a perfect way to round up this evening.
Oh, yeah, after the show, I'm definitely going over there and checking that out right away.
See you there.
Okay, Louis Buff Parry is an international scholar, a renowned code cracker, inventor, and Renaissance man of the arts and sciences. Tonight, we will be discussing specifically his work with the cuneiform artifacts found in North America, and also his groundbreaking decoding of the Shepherd's Monument, and the history and mystery of Oak Island and the Money Pit. So let's bring on Buff. Buff, are you there?
I sure am, Bill.
How are you doing tonight?
Oh, very well, very well. And before I forget, for those who do tune into the YouTube channel, Truth in the Buff, there is a third part that is not posted yet, and you're all going to be left hanging, which I think my manager of the station did on purpose.
A little tease there.
Yeah,
a cliffhanger.
Exactly. Yeah.
Buff, what type of videos do you plan on putting on that YouTube channel, by the way? In
well,
general?
They're videos that we are making ourselves. There may be some other videos that we put on that are not of our own making, but are relevant to the general themes of the channel. So there are going to be a few videos where I'm sort of rebuffing everything's
pun intended.
You'll be hearing this name a whole lot of times, Buff. Where I've received some fair amount of criticism and I think undeserved misunderstanding in a lot of the areas that I've done work, and so we're going to be addressing that to kind of clear the air and make certain that it is understood. What it is I've been working on in different fields of endeavor that seem to have locked me in as one of the head Illuminati members and things like that.
So in other words, you want to set some records straight.
Exactly.
A little authenticity, please.
Yes, you got it.
Buff, you just mentioned about your work. Can you just give our audience a brief summary of some of your renowned achievements and groundbreaking work as a scientist and codecracker?
Well, right now I'm working on some new aspects to the Voynich manuscript decipherment. That's a complex issue. It's a very mystifying manuscript that has been carbon-14 dated to about 1410, 1420 in terms of the age of the vellum sheets. And those are, of course, made of animal hide vellum sheets. And so we know that that the sheets themselves go back to the very early 1400s when ink and paint started to enter the picture. Obviously will come later after the book is assembled. And then people in those days used to do manuscript illumination and things like that. In this case, it's a script that has no counterpart. There's no, comparison to it anywhere on Earth. There are a whole lot of images of octagons, for example, and salamanders, two of my favorite motifs through human cultural history. So all that said, what I've put together more recently is the significance of the salamander and the octagons as guides with which to decipher the manuscript, and also the custodial chain of people who have had this manuscript is in it and of itself very telling about the identity of the manuscript itself. So that's my current one of my current projects.
And that's interesting. I'm sorry, Carol.
Oh, I was just going to say, I stumbled upon those images on the internet several years ago. Little did I know I would be talking to an expert in that area, but they're really quite astonishing. Somebody could you spell it for everybody so they can do a search later? It's
Voynich.
Right, and would be Voynich manuscript. Would that be a good way to?
Yeah.
Okay, great. All right, but anyway, back to our main topic.
Yeah, Louis, you mentioned also about the octagons. Now, is there some connection with the octagon and Chief Joseph tablet as far as the pouch that he was wearing with the Star of Asher? That is shaped. Okay, go ahead.
Definitely. First, on the Star of Asher, this is an octagon that is a very not complex, but stylized type of octagon, not like a normal octagon, if there is such a thing as a normal octagon. The Star of Asher is on the flag of the Assyrian people. Assyrian people are the last, really the only truly indigenous people of Iraq and Syria, although Kurds would consider themselves to be indigenous, and a Yazidi group also is thought to be indigenous, certainly by themselves. But the Assyrians are definitely indigenous. They've had a continuous occupation of approximately the same lands for thousands and thousands and thousands of years. So they have found, the Assyrians themselves have found a striking similarity with the chief of the Nez Perce back in the 1870s, Chief Joseph, and a beaded star of Asher on one of his pouches that attached to his belt. But he also had, when he was arrested, this was at the end of what were called the Indian Wars in America, and he was arrested right almost on the border of what is now the province I live in, Alberta, and the state of Montana. When he was arrested, the general who arrested him found a clay tablet that was approximately an inch in all directions, and it bore a cuneiform inscription, and the cuneiform inscription was impressed on both sides of this clay tablet. Obviously, when the clay was still wet, that's how cuneiform worked. When it was impressed into clay, the clay had to still be relatively moist. So it's a very interesting item, and it's attached to, at least in my mind, to a couple of other, well, actually 4 other artifacts that have been found in North America. 2 cuneiform inscribed items in Georgia, 1 in Ohio, the one that I just mentioned, and then what's called a Dilman ironstone artifact that was found on Shawnee Creek in Oklahoma. Okay. So, I mean, we could keep going on this, or maybe wend ourselves to.
Actually, I wanted you to touch first on the Chief Joseph tablet, because not only it's about his pouch, but also on the stone itself, doesn't it indicate a lamb or some type of indication to a priestess of some kind on that stone?
Yes, it's a recording of a transaction of one sacrificial lamb for a ceremony that in my opinion, in my interpretation, is a ceremony that was celebrated each year on the same day of the same month. And it would be the initiation of young women into a priesthood or priestesshood. But I'm going to stay up with the age that we're in now. And we'll just say priesthood.
I like that.
Okay. And there's another artifact that kind of matches that description, and that's what's called the lead tablet that was found in Georgia. So, except in that case, the reference is to several lambs and goats for sacrificial purposes.
Now, the one that it was found in Georgia, I believe Miss Hearn found that in her flower garden while she was digging in. Is
an amazing, talk about Americana. Here's a woman presumably with a shovel by herself, and was it flowers she was planting? Do we know that, or vegetables?
Yeah, well, I'm on record saying vegetable garden, but I can tell you now it is definitely a flower garden that she was preparing. I made one slight error in my recall of what it was that she was preparing the garden bed for, and
of course there are some edible flowers, so we have to kind of fudge maybe on that a little bit.
As a child, I discovered many edible flowers. Right. I was a flower eater.
Oh, really?
Well, you've heard of the lotus eaters.
I was about to say, is there a connection there? Okay.
If there is, we're not going to get into it on
all right.
And that stone, that's the second stone that we're speaking about, the Hearn stone. Is that similar in size, or is it larger?
No, it's much larger than the Chief Joseph stone, the Chief Joseph tablet. Of the 3, there's really only one stone that we're talking about. The 3 that I'm focusing on the most, and it's the iron stone that has the Dilman inscription, and the Dilman inscription is Dilman symbols that together make up an image, and the image is the image of the goddess Inanna, who was in effect the first major paramount goddess in in human history in terms of a goddess that was recorded, and she started the continuum that led to ultimately to Venus.
Wow.
Now, how far back does the Dilman civilization? What is the era for that? How long ago, Buff, is that?
Well, it could go back 8,200 years.
Wow.
I fixed that date because that is the date when the Gulf, the Arabo-Persian Gulf, was engulfed in water, because there was a water level rise around the world due to the pulsing exiting of the backup flood waters from the melting of the glaciers right here in Canada. And Hudson Strait had an ice dam that collapsed, and the miles high water levels went gushing into the Atlantic, and that caused this collective all around the world rise of the water level. And so in that Gulf area, there used to be an oasis, and this is now proven by a friend and colleague of mine, Jeremy I. Rose, and the oasis was a very fertile oasis. The Tigris and Euphrates drained to the north through what's today called Iraq into what is today called the Persian Gulf or Arabo-Persian Gulf. And so as the water rose, it engulfed this oasis. And the operating theory, which really to me is no longer a theory, but we'll call it that. Okay. The operating theory is that the people who lived on that oasis, on this super fertile oasis, more fertile than the Nile Delta and so on, had obviously had time to get in their reed boats and sail to the shores, whether it would be the western shore or the eastern shore from this oasis. And if it was the eastern shore, then we're talking about today's Iran. If it's the western shore, we're talking about Saudi Arabia, even Kuwait to the north, and Bahrain and
Qatar,
so forth, and Qatar as you go further south, in the Emirates and of course Dilman, or pardon me, it used to be called Dilman and Dilman Nituki, but Bahrain is seen as one of the major centers of where these people who then formulated, if they hadn't already, the Dilman script, where they lived and did that and made Dilman seals and things like that for royalty and the like.
Now, this was also to be referred to as Nituki, I believe.
Yes, in the Sumerian cuneiform writings, there is a reference to Dilman Nituki, and so Dilman would be the empire, if you will, similar to the Phoenician Empire, being a trade sort of mercantile, empire, and Nituki is a reference to an island, a sacred island of fire, or a glowing, illuminated sacred island. And when you break down the Nituki, that's exactly what you get. The Ni stands for what becomes, the term bitumen. And that's to me really, really fascinating for all kinds of reasons we probably don't have time to get into tonight. But the other two roots, combine into this triconsonantal root term, where a word construct, come out to mean the island, the sacred island of fire, or the sacred glowing island. A few different combinations like that.
Okay. Now, I just want to know a little bit more about the Dilman civilization that encompassed Bahrain, Kuwait, Qatar, and the eastern province of Saudi Arabia, and their trading center, and how they traded with the Indus Valley civilization and pre- and co-dynastic Egyptians back during that period.
Okay. The word Bahrain in Arabic means where the waters meet. Oh. Majma al-Bahrain is the fullest expression of where they meet. So Bahrain, literally means two waters, but it implies where the two waters meet. Some people think that has to do with the fresh sweet water that came up from and through the island, filtered and all the rest, mixed with the salt water of the Gulf. And so what was your question again? I see some questions.
It was a very intense question.
The reason I got off track is that I see some questions that are flashing up here. Has Buff read the works of John Ackerman or Barry Fallon? I totally distracted me.
Those are coming in from the chat room. So,
hello, everybody in chat. Hello, you guys. They're amazing.
Hello, our good friends in the chat room. But,
oh, my goodness.
Buff, we'll pass those questions as they come in, so you don't have to...
I won't read them anymore.
Why not? Look away.
I just
so Bahrain is the name of an island, and it's actually an archipelago. There's the largest island of the archipelago called Bahrain, and then there are these smaller little islands that go almost in all directions from the major central island. That island was the trade hub of the Indus Valley civilization,
right?
And that's to the east. So you have to come out the Indus River in boats, in ships, whatever, and find your way coming west and then up into the Gulf and then to the island of Bahrain. That would be for the people coming out of the Indus Valley civilization. Then Sumer, straight to the north.
Just one tiny interruption. How long would something like that approximately take? Or are we talking months or?
No. Just a matter of weeks.
Weeks. Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
If you look on a map and you see where the Indus River flows out into the sea, the Arabian Sea, and then just follow the coast to the west and then up into the Gulf. So that's
okay.
That's the Indus Valley. Then straight north of Bahrain would be Sumer, and Dilman and Sumer, and first Dilman and then Sumer. And Dilman was coexistent with the Indus Valley civilization's original roots, and they have a relationship actually in some of the writing forms. But Sumer was the really big civilization, and that was. Up around Iraq and Iran, and not to forget this whole Persian side of it, because they were also part of the Dilman, period, and show some of the same artifacts. So we've got those two main civilizations of the Indus Valley and of Sumer. Now look, so we have east, north, go west, and you've got Egypt.
Right.
There's evidence in the graves that have been excavated, the pre-dynastic Egyptian graves, that lapis lazuli had been traded to Egyptians even before their dynastic civilization rose. So where did that lapis lazuli come from? It came from what's today the easternmost extension of Afghanistan, that borders with China. That's the world's treasure trove of lapis lazuli, which was probably one of the most valued gems, not semi-precious, but truly precious gems in those days, to all of those civilizations. So that means we have, and they would have the bulk of that lapis lazuli would have been brought to Bahrain for trade purposes by the by the Indus Valley people in exchange with the Dilman, and then the subsequent Sumerians and others who came to rule, Bahrain. So at one time, especially once the dynastic rise occurred in Egyptian history, you've got early dynastic Egyptian traders, you've got Sumerian traders, and you have traders from the Indus Valley. The three huge civilizations that totally impacted the world and still do. They still do in a reverberating, kind of resonating way.
Yes.
All exchanging goods on this island of Bahrain, but also Qatar. Not to forget, Qatar is just right next to Bahrain, and it projects out as well into the Gulf. So sort of projects out. those two sites would be the major, I think, locus of where the major trade happened, and most people conclude that the majority of that was on the island of Bahrain.
Mm-hmm.
Now, Buff, I just have a similar question dealing with the Sumerians in a way here. In the Mesopotamian poem Gilgamesh, the Sumerians described Dilman as a paradise garden. Could this have inspired the Garden of Eden in the Book of Genesis?
Absolutely. Absolutely. The ultimate garden would have been that oasis I mentioned that got flooded by the rising waters.
Right.
And then all the legends and the romance and the motifs and all the rest of it just got translated onto and transferred onto Bahrain and region. So there are all sorts of indicators that really Genesis in particular, Bereshit as it would be called in Hebrew, in the beginning, that's what that means. That almost all of the major accounts were taken from the cuneiform inscribed Sumerian records, and that would include, the flood, even.
Okay.
And we know the flood memory would have been much fresher then if in 8,200 years ago there was this massive flood that engulfed the oasis of the Arabo-Persian Gulf. That's still, in terms of oral traditions and so forth, that's still pretty much in the memory. So the first accounting of the flood you can find with the Gilgamesh and Kaidu Utnapishtim story. A real quick and curious coincidence, if we want to call it.
Oh, yes, please. Love them.
Is Utnapishtim. Utnapishtim was the old man, kind of the wise man of the hill, that seems to appear in all of these legends and stories. His name means where the male studs are. So if you have a big boat and you're trying to get male and female together, you want to you're going to be looking for for male studs of all the species that you could get onto the boat. now in the Cree language of North America, and the Cree people are the second largest First Nation of North America, second only to the Navajo Apache, which are part of the same. Really, they are virtually the same, the Navajo and the Apache. In the Cree language, which is not directly related to the Navajo Apache complex, the Utnapishtim, right? Would just say it fast. You have exactly the same two words. Means essentially the same thing. Where it's Uta or Ata means where in Cree and in Dilman Sumerian, and then Napis means young male, and Atim means horse or dog or a few other animals too. So you have the same essential meaning. And the idea of young male stud animals, it built into that word. Wow. That also is the name of the old guy who's consulted by Gilgamesh after Enkidu perishes.
Okay, now we have a question from the chat room, and the question is from Wolfgal. So. Are these cuneiform tablets that are found in North America, did they originate from ancient Sumeria, Bahrain? That's the question, Buff.
Okay. We have some more testing to do, and there's kind of three phases to this whole project. The first phase isn't really quite complete yet. The second phase is kind of virtually completed, even though we have to get through the first to get to the second. What we would like to do is test Chief Joseph's clay tablet for some possible unique aspects and contents that would indicate where that clay, was mined or quarried, or where it came from. The the idea, the prevailing idea is, since these artifacts have been vetted, and particularly the Chief Joseph clay tablet has been completely vetted, and there are several reasons why it has to be 100% authentic. Because they relate to each other and speak to the same region in terms of their of the content of what they have to say. It's my view that they came from the old world over here. The South American examples that are found in Chile and Bolivia are mixed iconographically with the local indigenous motifs. So you have bowls that have on the outside of them the indigenous, local artistic representations, and then on the inside you have pure, perfect cuneiform writing. And so what does that indicate? It indicates that there was real integration that went on between peoples, between the First Nations down in South America and the Sumerians who arrived there, or whomever else may have been, arriving and using cuneiform script. Up here, this does not suggest that there wasn't integration, because the oral tradition of Chief Joseph was, I'm going to pretend I'm him for a moment. My ancient ancestors received this item from some visitors from abroad, and they went amongst us, which implies that they, integrated with the Nez Perce people, and that they were going to return. That's Chief Joseph's oral tradition. So. Right. So it seems to me that, and I accept Chief Joseph's oral tradition almost completely, because his item is so compelling, and there's no possible way that there can be any monkey business. Not in 1877. And after I drink a little sip of water, I'll tell you why.
No problem. Oh, and also now, is this the part where everything in the bags they were all traditionally interlinked? There was not just something that, this is bright and shiny, I'll put it in here. It was something with a meaning, with a tradition.
Yeah, it started from generation to generation.
Exactly. Yes. We're talking about people with profound ancient cultures and civilizations of the Americas, and they weren't crows or ravens who just picked any sparkling item, just because it sparkled. But that is a kind of a, that is not a prevailing notion, but it's one held by a lot of people, including academics I've dealt with right here at the University of Alberta. The idea was, Chief Joseph would have had all kinds of unrelated trinkets in his medicine bag. Well, this is completely impossible, and it shows the ignorance of so-called specialists and academics in these respective fields that make you an Indian expert. Yes. There is no possible way that you would have a mixture of items in a medicine bag that didn't intimately relate to each other, one to the next. So. He did have other items that are referred to, and my understanding is that they're in the same location where that clay tablet is now reposed, which is West Point Military Academy in New York. And I want to be visiting there very soon, which is still part of the Phase 1 project, Phase 1 of the project, to get this thing up and moving as a artifact display.
So, Buff, by Phase 1, you mean that you need to go to each of the locations of these three artifacts and actually go there and do research and look them over and look over the documentation from the past people that have researched them themselves also? What is that going to entail for you to do to get possession, I will just say, so to speak, so that you can present this? Because I know you're planning an exhibit in Qatar with these three exhibits. With these three artifacts. So what is encompassed with the Phase 1 aspect?
Okay, well, let's first look at the minimalist and then the maximalist possibility.
Why not?
So the minimalist would be these three artifacts. Okay. The maximalist would be the other two that we know are available for study in North America, one in Ohio, and a second one in Georgia. And if it's possible, include some of the artifacts that are in Bolivia and in Chile with this, because it'll show the difference in visits and the types of visitors. And that in one case, there seems to be. Are you there?
Yes,
oh, yeah.
We're here.
Okay. Everything just went blank.
Oh no!
It wasn't. It wasn't me alone going blank. Believe me.
All right, we're fine.
Okay. So that's the maximalist option. The phase one is this. The completion of the study phase. I've dealt with the owner, the titular owner of the lead tablet that is in Georgia, and he's the president of a university, and it's the university that really owns this artifact that's now kept in a local museum in Lagrange. And so he introduced to me some protocols that were required for me to be able to really negotiate this item to take on tour. And it's not that he has said no at all, but I have to meet certain requirements, right. And those are to read through in person, not electronically, not through mail or otherwise, but to be there in Georgia and read through the files that exist surrounding this lead tablet. The lead tablet was discovered in 1963. And again, from the flower bed,
yes,
when Mrs. Joe Hearn in those days, he took your husband's first name as well,
right?
There's no reason to think there's anything fishy at all about it, and she was totally earnest and I think honest in every detail that she provided when she brought it in, but. People naturally, with especially lead, because with a lead tablet, you have to kind of pour the molten lead in place to make the lead tablet, and because of that, that takes a lot of work. So if it did happen in the old country, whichever part of this Sumerian Empire we're talking about, and it was a vast empire. It may have been pre-manufactured, a blank slate, and then carved over here, or it was on board for whatever reason. The interrelationship between these three artifacts is, I think, quite intimate, and it does suggest that there was one boat with a number of people on it who were somehow part of the trading hub that existed, especially on the island of Bahrain and on the tip of Qatar, and that it for whatever reason got lost or was part of an ancient trading network. We can go on a tangent on this one. Right. I'll do it real quickly with you. There are collections of what are called Cypriomonita shells. These are cowrie shells. Moneta means money. So cowrie money shells that only grow from the Indian Ocean to the Hawaiian Islands on the bottom of this of the ocean, of the Indian Ocean and the Pacific Ocean. That's their only habitat. So to have thousands and thousands and hundreds of thousands of these shells over in North America in the Copina cultural collections, that's the American Southeast. Copina stands for copper and galena. Long story we won't get into. To have those dating back into the millennia of years is stunning. Where did they come from? How did they get here? It has to be with the trading mission, because those shells were used as money throughout Eurasia, Africa, and the Asian Southeast. So they were money already. And they were obviously used. Hudson Bay Company adapted them as money to trade with indigenous trappers.
Right.
People who bought in. Yes.
Buff also, it would also indicate that they must have also traveled to South America and Central America, because aren't these artifacts found all over the Americas? It just couldn't have just been specifically North America. They must have been all over the Americas.
Yeah, I just described that have been found in Chile and Bolivia.
Okay,
Amazing.
So that really is incredible. And I know recently you just had a presentation with at the Sucker Creek First Nation Reserve in Alberta with Chief Jim Badger, and you, I think you proposed the Institute for the Studies of Indigenous Anomalies. Does this correlate with the artifacts? What is the connection, and what is the goal and the focus of this institute, which is ISA, the acronym? What exactly is it all about?
The ISIA.
ISIA.
It's about studying, what the so-called specialists say shouldn't be here, but are here, and why they've created this convenient catch-all term of anomaly. They'll call these things anomalies, even if they're vetted, proven to be non-hoax, and you can't hoax a cowrie shell that's dug up, from several feet underground, and in part of stratigraphy that's well known and identified by archaeologists and geologists. So they don't know what to do with it, though, because they don't have the paradigms, they don't have the frameworks to fit these so-called anomalies into. So they call them anomalies, put them on a shelf, and leave them, and then they don't bother with what the implications are to these artifacts until something else happens. So, like, for example, when they found that the Vikings, were here 500 years before Columbus, which totally, rocked the hearts and souls of the Italians and the Spaniards, who fought over whether Columbus was Italian or Spanish.
Yes, right.
That was devastating to both, both of his fan clubs, because he obviously wasn't the first European to be here. And I don't think, too very many people took that very seriously, for the last century with what has been found. So the institute that we want to form is going to address issues of those cowrie shells. We know, and the fact that Hudson Bay Company took them up and used them as money, which is literally what the Latin word for that species of cowrie shell, Cypria moneta, the cowrie money.
Amazing.
It is, and the indigenous people already had this real desire for them and use for them. They were fertility symbols. If I may be blunt and frank with you, speaking scientifically, they look like vaginas, and they would travel with another shell called Dentalia that was only found on the northwest coast of Vancouver Island, of this continental area, British Columbia. And those were gastropods that would stand upright, and they look like erect phalluses. So the two would go together. Money, despite rumors to the contrary, really comes out of a fertility matrix. Money was seen as something that would enhance and extend and expand fertility. That is its origin, and out of need, obviously. But when you get into, the surplus and the extravagant and exotic aspects of trade, money comes into the picture directly squared with fertility issues of the culture and the spirituality of the people who are using it. So, we want to look at those shells. We want to look at these cuneiform inscribed artifacts. There are several different areas to venture into without getting all goofed up with diffusionism and Barry Fell, who always pops up in the picture when this kind of discussion comes along. I knew him, I worked with him, we had terrible disagreements, and I'm kind of happy to say that we did, because he did some wrongful things. He was a great zoologist at Harvard. But in this epigraphic context, everything was, about diffusion. My point on this very quickly is,
yes,
I think indigenous people could make pyramids on their own, thank you. They didn't need either Anunnaki or ancient Egyptians coming over and teaching them how to do it. Pyramids are inherent in our psyches as a geometric shape. And stepped pyramids are so logical; they withstand all weather conditions. It just makes sense. A teepee is something that has an apex to it. I mean, look at architecture around the world through time. It's functional. First off,
yes, and then the form.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not taking the magic and the mysticism away from ancient Egypt. That's not what I'm doing, or from the Mayans and the Aztecs.
No, of course not.
But Buff, let me ask you a question. I don't want to. I just want to be a little devil's advocate here. But couldn't it be possible that some of the indigenous peoples back then could have, if it was the Sumerians or Phoenicians, whoever it may have been, who have had this trade establishment here with the Americas, could it be possible that some of the indigenous peoples went over there and they witnessed structures and they came back and incorporated that with their own style of building? I mean, is that possible?
Very much so. You remember that 8,200 year figure, 8,200 years ago, or 8,200 BC, but there's a debate about whether it's 8,200 BC or 8,200 years from now. Regardless, we know that there was funerary architecture over 6,000 years ago, between 6,000 and 7,000 years ago, that lined the coast of maritime Canada, a special type of funeral architecture. Using stones, large to small or small to large, and red ochre to put all over the harpoons that were used to hunt whales with, and so forth. With those are older over here than they are in the Breton area of France, where they're also found. They're like 700 to 800 years older over here than the oldest ones found on the coast of France. So that implies that there was certainly some kind of navigation going on between eastern North America and western European Atlantic coastal regions.
Right.
But what about going into the Mediterranean? Well, it turns out the first three words used by ancient Egyptians for God are in the Cree language. All three. No, we've already done
that. That is amazing.
That is amazing.
Totally. Munto, in the Cree language here, there's Kichimanto and Machimanto. One is like the good God, and one is the evil God, or, the devil, if you will. I mean, some people don't like that translation. I understand why. But to use, Western European religions and the Abrahamic religions and so on, it's the contrast of black and white, dark and light, and all of that we're talking about with the Cree linguistic construct of Kitsimanto and Machimanto. So, but Manto is the first word for God recorded in ancient Egypt. And then there's this very strange word, Katapechikit, the word I just used is approximately the sound in both the Cree language and in ancient Egyptian, and it means the one who owns and controls all things.
Wow.
And so on. So there's a whole lot of other lexical examples that would suggest there was some kind of a trade. We know that the Navajo and Apache lexicon or dictionary has all kinds of items that are still being spoken in eastern Siberia by the Ket people, who are under great study right now because they're speaking a language that is only over in North America called Dene, which is what the Navajo and Apache speak, and many, many First Nations up here in Canada. So, there's nothing, there's no pushing of an envelope or far-fetched about finding ancient linguistic roots that bind up, people around the world. There is something called Proto-Dene Caucasian. And under that title, this is in today's linguistics, science of linguistics. Okay. Under that title is ancient Basque, Sumerian, and the Dene languages we're talking about, Navajo and Apache. So, the linguists seem to have no problem with recognizing the extent of cross-fertilization, linguistically speaking, around the world many, many, many thousands of years ago. That I think a lot of other, and I use the term Indian experts in a very derogatory way, as you may have guessed by now. Yes.
You know what's interesting? I was reading somewhere when I was doing the research, and I read that the Assyrians used to sing a Rahway song that was sung by the men and women, and it's very similar to that of the Native Americans and their songs and chants. So I kind of found that also a little connection there, as far as even with the music, there was some type of connection as well. I don't know if you're aware of that, but I found that in my research.
Oh, I like that.
Yeah, that was pretty cool. Actually, before we get to break, Buff, there's a question from the chat room.
Okay.
And it's from JB, Jim Bob Short, and he wants to know, does the guest relate to Zechariah Sitchin and the translations of Mauro Biglino? If you're aware of their work.
I'm aware of Zechariah Sitchin. My problem is the rush to judgment and conclusion that I find with Zechariah and with others, in his direction. There's so much uncertainty and mystery about all of this that, it's one thing to build a construct that you call a theory or an hypothesis. It's another thing to be putting forward ideas that are presented as true, and that the findings are conclusive. So I part company from that direction. I think the mysteries, speak for themselves as mysteries and need to be probed and much more deeply investigated. But I would not want to have an operating theory when I deal with the data, with the evidence, and only then thereby prove my theory. I would rather just be neutral, look at it all, know that there's something strange going on, and draw a conclusion after the fact, not enter the realm of study with a conclusion.
Right.
And that's just a difference in approach. And so, I don't condemn these people, but I don't really agree with their methodology. And I'm a little bit leery about their conclusions. In the face of wonders that are out of this world, literally, we don't need to push envelopes or push things together that don't really fit.
Exactly.
Once again, I'm reminded of Carl Sagan's The Demon-Haunted World, which really addresses that kind of thing.
Yes. Yeah, we want our theories to be accurate.
Yes.
But I'd rather do the study first and then come out of it all with the theory, which is kind of what I did with the Oak Island, investigations that I've been party to since 2004, and long before that, but in a real active way since about 2004.
Yes, and here that's a segue to Oak Island, yes?
Oh, yes. And the Alagons. Actually, Buff, we were speaking earlier off the air, and you mentioned that one of your students, Rodney, was at Oak Island, I believe, correct? And there's some type of connection between the pouch on Chief Joseph and Oak Island, so we can actually touch on that also on the other side?
Absolutely, but just to clarify, Rodney was not at Oak Island. Rodney was with me down visiting the Nez Perce artifacts and the museum and the archive center and so on, and that's also part of finishing phase one. We have to go back there. There are a number of finishing touches that are necessary to complete phase one before we can really enter phase two.
Yes,
which we can also return to in phase two of your program.
Hey, very good. Oh, well done. Very well done.
And Buff, that exhibit is planned hopefully to be done in Qatar, correct?
Well, we'd like to premiere it in Qatar in a museum named after one of the real prominent sheikhs of the area, who has an interest in ancient artifacts. And, I brought an artifact, a piece of the cofferdam from from Oak Island to Sheikh Duej Al Khalifa, one of the prominent sheikhs of Bahrain, the brother-in-law of the king of Bahrain, and his cousin as well, and presented it to him in a very formal, ceremonial way. So he had, he has a piece of the cofferdam of Oak Island, and we're looking toward that direction for financing the freeze circle that would be required ultimately to, I think, do the kind of excavation that's necessary at the bottom of the money pit.
Okay.
Because it's so extensive under there. All those boreholes that they've got on the island and so on, Oak Island, are away from the money pit, but they still found things even in the boreholes.
Well, so that's exactly where we're going to go in the next hour. We're going to go into the money pit, Oak Island, and also where it all began for you, and that was at the Decoding the Shepherd's Monument. And we're coming up on a break, Buff, so can we continue the discussion on the other side?
Absolutely.
Great.
Listening to IRN, the Inception Radio Network, Chicago, Illinois.
Looking for a cure for boredom? Never worry, IRN's interactive website introduces a number of ways to pass time while you listen to your favorite show. Choose anything from the IRN Chat Lounge, Game Lounge, Video Lounge, or the Mood Lounge. These fun, exciting features let you chat in real time with fellow listeners, view live skywatches, play daily posted online games, or pick a show based on topic. The choices are endless, so use your time wisely by keeping it all on IRN.
Are you a fan of Inception Radio Network? Do you reckon it's the best alternative talk radio station on the planet? Well, if you do, head to facebook.com/Inception Radio Network and like the page. Tell your friends, spread the word, and keep listening to the best.
Hi, Inception Radio Network listeners. This is Amanda. Just a reminder that Inception Radio Network is on Twitter. Follow us at I_R_N and keep up to date about who's on tonight, what interviews they'll be doing, who's guest spotting, what topics they'll be covering. Tweet to us, tweet about us, retweet topics to your friends, and most importantly, never miss a great show again. That's I_R_N.
Hi, Bob Tarmac for MJ'sHealthyWay.com. Are you into vitamins, nutrition, meal replacements, health shakes, keeping your body in good shape, your internal engine going? Boy, do I have a perfect place for you. MJ'sHealthyWay.com. They offer the best service and products, and they'll tell you anything you need to know about any product they have to offer. I get all my vitamins, meal replacements, shakes from MJ'sHealthyWay.com. That's spelled MJSHealthyWay.com. There's so much more at the website. Go check it out. MJ'sHealthyWay.com.
Don't have a computer? Is your internet connection down? Don't worry. Use your trusty cell phone or landline and call into our listen line at 401-283-6700 to listen to the Inception Radio Network 24/7. Again, that call-in number is 401-283-6700. For the Inception Radio Network, I am MJ.
Hello, Inception Radio Network listeners. This is Amanda. Remember, you can take your Inception Radio shows on the go. Just download the Inception Radio Network app for your iPhone, iPad, or Android smartphones and access live shows, past shows, guest lineups, and much more. Just visit the iTunes Store or the Google Play Marketplace and download it today for free. Psst, are you looking for a cure for boredom? Never worry. IRN's new interactive website introduces a number of ways to pass time while you listen to your favorite show. Choose anything from the IRN Chat Lounge, the Game Lounge, Video Lounge, or the Mood Lounge. These fun, exciting features let you chat in real time with fellow listeners, view live skywatches, play daily posted online games, or pick a show based on topic. The choices are endless. Use your time wisely, keeping it all on IRN.
EPIC is Extraordinary Phenomena Investigations Council, the forum for scholars, experts, and those fascinated by and involved in the study of ancient civilizations, conspiracies, cryptozoology, ETs, and UFOs, fringe science, the paranormal, and all manner of extraordinary phenomena. Please join EPIC as we examine the mysteries of the world and beyond on epicvoyagers.com, and for updates on the upcoming interactive video presentations, the latest news and discussion on the EPIC forum, as well as research, investigations, and membership opportunities. Epic Voyages program schedule is on the Inception Radio Network. Thank you for joining us.
Welcome back to Epic Voyages Radio here on Inception Radio Network. And tonight our guest is Louis Buff Parry. And Buff, when we left off, I just wanted to get back to change the topic a little bit and speak about Shepherd's Monument and your decoding of the monument and the connection to Oak Island. So if you may, you can take it from there and start with Shepherd's Monument.
Oh, yeah.
Okay. Since 1748, there's been a monument located outside of this beautiful stately building called Shugborough Hall on Litchfield Estate, a prominent estate in the English Midlands. And this monument was constructed to commemorate something. And it had carved on it this enigmatic, unbroken code or cipher that Charles Darwin tried to, crack, and he couldn't. Charles Dickens tried. The people, who are associated with the Imitation Game at Bletchley Park, this great film that's out now, they all tried to break the code. They couldn't do it. And no one could figure out why on earth would all of this expense, have been. Why would this monument have been created? What could be so valuable that this great, gorgeous monument would be carved out of marble? And what it is the reverse relief of Nicolas Poussin's second edition or second painting called Et in Arcadia Ego, or Shepherds of Arcadia. It goes by both names. There's an earlier painting that has to do with Lady Anson. The Anson family owned this estate and the Shugborough Hall and the monument. And they were cultivating a lot of the arcane, a lot of kind of Rosicrucian type mysticism, flirting around with Freemasonry, and so a lot of people have associated all of that with the reason why this monument was created. I'm gonna make this part short because the other part is a little lengthier. Okay. An artifact of great renown that was desired by people from many different parts of the world was secured in Canada, and then it was retrieved from Canada by what I'm saying are Jacobites. Jacobites who had initiated a couple of great rebellions against what they considered to be the usurping King George III, second first, and Queen Mary, and then King William of Orange, who had kicked off the throne, King James II. So, and we'll get to that. That brings us to Oak Island perfectly. Right. But what happened when I went to the Shepherd's Monument, literally in person, and brought with me what were already my decodes of the inscription there, I left the decodes with Bletchley Park, that great coding cracking center. Again, that's featured in the Imitation Game film, and so out of many different people who had come forward and rose to the call that came out of both Shugborough Hall and Bletchley Park to crack this code. I thoroughly cracked it, and I cracked every aspect of it that others hadn't been able to do. And so I was considered to be kind of like the leading code cracker of all those who had submitted decipherments of this very strange, enigmatic inscription that goes with the reverse relief of Nicolas Busson's painting, Shepherds of Arcadia, version 2, and version 1, a copy of which was kept inside of Shugborough Hall. Okay, so a journalist who handled all the intelligence issues, terrorism, and so on, named Nick Fielding, who wrote for the London Times, did a feature spread in the first section of the London Times, and this was one of the great big Sunday London Times that this happened in late November of 2004, and he connected my decipherment with the Oak Island mystery. I hadn't done that. I made an indirect reference to some of the characters that are thought to be associated with Oak Island, like Francis Bacon, John Dee, Queen Elizabeth I, and Shakespeare, and that whole constellation, because there was a lot going on with those people in relation to my decipherment. The Reformation, Counter-Reformation, all those things were starting to happen. Anyway, so interestingly enough, it now turns out that 1746 is a key date when this artifact, that monument was created to commemorate the arrival of at Litchfield Estate, when this artifact was shipped by the Jesuits, and this is on record and by records kept by none less than Alexander von Humboldt, the founder of modern geography, ecology, volcanology, earth sciences, oceanography, and so on, and so two other. Yes.
No question about the authenticity. It's there, right? Okay.
So Buff, the Jacobites brought it to New England. Is that what they? In 1715, the first major Jacobite rebellion happened, and the Jacobites had won one of the battles called Prestonpans, which is in eastern Scotland, close to Edinburgh, and then when they marched with this same artifact, when they marched on to London, they passed through a place called Preston, which is in northern England, northwestern England, and in Preston they were arrested. They were momentarily defeated in their rebellion, and 1,569 of them were exiled to New England. And so with them was this artifact. So they're all called Jacobites for a very convoluted reason we won't get into, because that requires a linguistics lesson and lecture that we don't want to get into. Yeah, we have a lot to cover in the 40 minutes or so we have left.
Exactly. So, okay, 1746 is an extremely important year. That is when Alexander von Humboldt says the artifact was released by the Jesuits to be taken to King Louis XV, but directly into the hands of his Secretary of State, a man named Frederick Philippot, the Count de Maurepas, and he was also the Secretary of the Marine. So a man named Le Jonquière, who was the admiral of French fleet, was en route from Nova Scotia, which had been called Acadia before it was formally name changed by the English to Nova Scotia, New Scotland. He was taking that artifact with him, again according to Alexander von Humboldt, 1746, and had some altercations around Nova Scotia in two different locations, and ran into a storm. So en route to France, he was apprehended. Some of his ships were apprehended by a man named Admiral Anson, who's the brother, was the brother of the person who kind of was the homebody of the two brothers at Litchfield Estate, Shugborough Hall, where they lived.
Right.
And so we have Admiral Anson now commandeering several of the ships of Admiral Le Jonquière. And, okay, so he ends up with this artifact. He's bringing it back. But there was some gold that year also brought to Scotland up the west coast of Scotland and deposited. Now we're talking, again, 1746. The last great Jacobite rebellion, uprising, happened at a place called Culloden. So it was called the Battle of Culloden. In 1746, the Jacobites lost horribly. And this gold that was, quote, from a French source, end quote, from a French source, arrives after they lost the battle. It was gold that was supposed to finance the Jacobite rebellion to the point that they could reinstate the Stuart dynasty, which is what King James was a part of. And King James I, who were famous for the King James version of the Bible and so on, he was a Stuart. I mean, the Stuart line was entrenched. That was the rightful, heir to the throne.
Right.
So when these others came and usurped the throne, a lot of people went against the usurpers, including almost all the Celtic people, the Scots, the Welsh, the Irish, the people like Quakers went against the usurpers, the false monarchy, if we want to call it that, and the Catholics. And that was what did it. When the Catholics all started to back King James II, the Church of England suspected King James of being, a papist, as they were called. Yes. Some said papist, some said poopist. There were different ways of being really insulting about it. And so so he was deposed because of the fear that the Vatican was going to get re-entrenched in England, which had been completely Catholic, not that many years before, but because of Henry VIII and other forces that occurred, the Protestant Reformation, Protestantism swept, and the Anglican Church became the Church of England, and so on and so on.
Yes.
Okay.
So the gold. I'm sorry, Buff. Yeah. So the gold you're saying pretty much came from the money pit. It said from a French source. So pretty much, your theory is that it was stored and it was taken from the money pit.
Yes, because the Sir William Phipps, who had been knighted in 1687, when King James II was still on the throne, was knighted because he had found a ship that had gone adrift onto a coral reef, and it was stuck there with its back end not on the coral reef. So it was still one whole ship at that point. He got on board. He took all the silver up. This is fully recorded. He brought all the silver that he could get off of the part of the ship that was on the coral reef, and he brought it to King James II in 1687. So he was made a knight, called now Sir William Phipps. So Sir William Phipps then, knew that there was gold left, in that treasure ship, along with some porcelain, china, things like that, pieces of which have been found at Oak Island, by the way. Over the course of all of the investigations and the boreholes, in various digs that have been done there. So okay. Now, in 1688, we have the beginning of what was called the Abenaki or Wabanaki Confederation of indigenous peoples, including the Mi'kmaq, who lived on the island. And so 1688 was a really important year for mobilization of, allies who were with the French, who were with the Wabanaki Confederacy, with the Scots and so forth, and the Jacobites in general. And so we've got this Sir William Phipps, who obviously, even if he had disagreements with King James II, was loyal, had to have been loyal to him because he was made a knight by King James. And to then just abandoned that connection when half of the aristocrats of England were fence sitters. They weren't sure if the new usurping monarchical family would actually survive. And so nor were they trusting that the Jacobites would bring the Stuart line back onto the throne. So they kind of stayed in the middle. And this is what Phipps did when he hid the gold. This is my theory, that he hid the gold in the money pit on Oak Island to help finance the Jacobite movement, because after all, it was their leader, King James II, who had knighted Phipps to begin with.
Right. So,
okay, we have the gold then stashed in the money pit, not for William of Orange, not for the usurper king, but for the reinstatement of the Stuart line through either King James II or one of his descendants.
Right, the lineage. Right.
Yes.
Right.
So now, so we're jumping from 1688 to 1746, when this mysterious, huge, amount of gold is delivered right to where the Jacobites had their last battle and lost, and it got there too late. So it was most of it was hidden, but some of it wasn't. There was a letter that was found that some current archaeologists working with BBC, have found the information in and evidence in about this treasure from a French source. As far as I know, and I've read as much as I could possibly get my eyes and hands on, no one defines what the French source is. Well, it turns out that Acadia, which later became Nova Scotia, was the French source. So it only stands to reason. Now, my young research assistant found something that is just incredible for me. I've been looking for years for it, and I haven't found such a pithy summing up of the events that he found. And he seems very glib about it, like incidentally. I found this.
And by the way,
moly, this is like the goose that laid the golden egg, and it's exact. So can I read to you this? It's
sure.
just not a long paragraph.
Please.
But it's taken directly from what Rodney McLeod found.
Sure.
And it's written by someone who wrote a book called The Rebellion and Savagery, the Jacobite Rising of 1745 and the British Empire. That he wrote just before he wrote this one I'm going to quote from, which is titled An Unsettled Conquest, the British Campaign Against the Peoples of Acadia, which is Nova Scotia. And remember that the Wabanaki Confederacy of Indigenous people who were associated with that region started in 1688 when King James was deposed. That's no coincidence. And it ended in 1763. Okay, so that's long after 1746. So that's how long the Wabanaki Confederacy existed. So, okay, I'm quoting from this highly acclaimed work by Geoffrey Plank, that was published in the year 2000, An Unsettled Conquest, the British Campaign Against the Peoples of Acadia. Okay, quote, the former French colony of Acadia, permanently renamed Nova Scotia by the British when they began an ambitious occupation of the territory in 1710, witnessed one of the bitterest struggles in the British Empire. For in Nova Scotia, which is Acadia at this point, the Mi'kmaq, the native local population, and the Acadians, descendants of the original French settlers, had coexisted for more than a century prior to the British conquest. And their friendships, family ties, common Catholic religion, and commercial relationships proved resistant to British enforced change. Despite numerous efforts at separating Acadians from the Mi'kmaq, the authorities took drastic steps in the 1750s. This is after 1746, keep in mind, right? And this is after the final Jacobite rebellion. Okay, forcibly deporting the Acadians to other British colonies and systematically decimating the native population. Well, I want to tell you that the word Cajun, down New Orleans way, if I'm going to say in French, the Acadians, I say, la Cajun. L'Acadien, 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 Cajun. That's how the Cajuns came from.
Undeniable, isn't it?
Yeah, no, this is not in debate. There's no question about
exactly.
This etymology. So, okay, but here's what those English people did. You know, forgive my bigotry here, but here's what they did to a people called the Beotuks, who are a sibling to the Mi'kmaq, but up in Newfoundland, which is just north of Nova Scotia. They would have, you know how the British, they like to do their fox hunts on Sunday? Mm-hmm. Well, instead of hunting down fox, they hunted down Beotuk people who had no horses, no way to flee, and they hunted them down in the forests and in the bushy areas of Newfoundland, and to the last one, murdered them all.
It's genocide. It's simply genocide. That's what it comes down to.
Brutal.
It is. And then look at what the French did. On the other hand, how close they got with the Mi'kmaq, and with the earlier French settlers that became known as the Cajun, the people of Acadia. You know, it's not for no reason that America had the revolution in 1776, and I call that the final victory of the Jacobites, because the Americans supported the Jacobite movement, certainly not the usurpers of the British crown, to the extent that George Washington sent 4 emissaries to Rome to bring the son of Bonnie Prince Charles Edward Stuart to America to become America's first king. This is in the Manawater Papers. It's in the Congressional Record, the Congressional Archives. There are 4 different sources that attest to this fact, that George Washington was going to have the Stuart line enthroned once again, but in America. In the same way that the Rosicrucians and the Freemasons shifted their orientation quite a bit on this side of the puddle. Not so much in Canada, but certainly in America, compared to the Rosicrucians and the Freemasons of Europe. So Yale, where the Voynich manuscript is kept right now, has skull and bones. That skull and bones came from a German Masonic lodge model, and it was transplanted over to Yale because it didn't function well with the old archaic. Hardly archaic, but I guess it was, by their standards then, it was method of doing masonry in Europe and in Great Britain. Same thing with Rosicrucianism. So there's secret societies abound in all this intrigue.
Yes,
Buff. It's funny you bring that up with the Freemasons, because I want to actually a little follow-up question with that. And I know I'm personally not a big believer in this, but I'm going to ask this question anyway. What about all the speculation that the Holy Grail and other priceless objects belonging to the Knights Templar were relocated to the Money Pit?
Well, one very important piece of evidence is the Mi'kmaq insignia, which is a reverse relief perfectly of the Templar cross, of the Templar flag. And it's perfect. I mean, it is perfect. So that alone can't be a coincidence. There's something, major in importance about that. The idea that the Templars had something to do with the Money Pit goes to the issue of what happened to the Ark of the Covenant. And many believe that the Templars actually found it. I explored the area where they dug underneath the Temple Mount. I spent a lot of time down there. I saw where they excavated. The Templars were kind of the first Western archaeologists, before Egyptology was born and so on. They were looking for the temple treasure. They believed Solomon and then his descendants, when the temple was still standing, would have hidden in the event of an invasion and a destruction of the temple. So they were looking for that. And if they found it, where would they have taken it? The idea is that there would be locations on this earth that if you will, a secret cabal or a secret society that's existed from the time of ancient Sumeria and has not been truncated, has never been destroyed or broken, has existed and kept its treasures and hidden its writings and all of that, over the course of many thousands of years. Right. And I don't have any problem with this idea, because the code system used by the Templars, called the Abjad system of encryption, was used by Sargon, one of the Babylonian emperors, and that's 700 BC, when Sargon applied the Abjad system. And so if he applied it, he didn't invent it. It preceded him, and wow. There's evidence of the Abjad system of encipherment, of coding, going back, way before the time of Sargon. So and who would have used codes? Who would have, for that many hundreds and thousands of years, used coding to hide information and locations of things? It would have been that same order. By any other name, it's the same order, and it has good and bad forces about it, and it's forever in tension within itself. I'm quite certain of that. So the money pit, could well have been used over the millennia, right, by this same order.
And what about the Phoenician connection, possibly to Nebuchadnezzar?
Oh, yes.
Well, instead of the Knights Templar, let's go much further back to the destruction of the Temple of Solomon, when we know that we know with certainty that certain of the temple treasures survived, because later, when the second temple was destroyed, Herod's temple, which was still a Jewish sacred temple built on the Solomonic location and so forth, that when the Romans took the treasures out and destroyed the temple, 2,000 years ago only, instead of 2,500 years plus ago, which would have been the Nebuchadnezzar period, that there was still the sacred menorah and incense, apparati, and all kinds of other paraphernalia that was used by the high priests in the inner sanctum and within the precincts of the temple itself. So, because those are all carved on the Arch of Titus, and that's the famous, evidence source that everything but the Ark of the Covenant had survived the first destruction and the second destruction of the temple. So we know the Ark of the Covenant just goes missing. It vanishes completely from any record reference to it. There are all kinds of oral traditions, legends, fables, hallucinations, and so forth. About where it's,
even FDR had an interest in the money pit.
Well, right. But his interest would have been because he definitely was part of that same ancient secret order, as was George Washington. 1 out of 3 American presidents was a Freemason. That doesn't mean the Masons were able to co-opt that order, because they didn't. It's pretty self-evident, in my opinion, having had a lot to do with Masonry. And I really have nothing against it, but they're not the keepers of the ultimate secrets. They're the keepers of other things. Some secrets, but secrets that have changed over time and so on. The real ultimate material and tradition is still well kept, by a Grand Master and his seneschals. And that's a long story. We can have it. You need a separate show just on this.
I was about to say.
Hopefully,
yes.
Buff will have you down the line in the future to
so that we
some other stuff too.
So that we could once and for all bury this Priory of Sion illusion and delusion. It was saturated absorbed by the Jesuits, and there's no question about that. And we know where. That was on the island of Sicily, and we know when. The Priory of Sion stopped existing once it was absorbed by the Jesuit order. And the Jesuits are what it's all about in terms of the Voynich manuscript, and who were the ongoing transmitters of some of the bigger secrets. But
so you think a subtle pattern begins to emerge there?
Absolutely. I mean, whatever anybody wants to think about Jesuits, everybody should know that they were kicked out of every European nation. They were kicked out of the Vatican. They couldn't even have their archives mixed with Vatican archives. So when I did work in the Jesuit archives in Rome, I had to go to this location that was connected to the outside boundary of the Vatican. They weren't allowed in. Now we have 2 Jesuit popes. There are some interesting prophecies about that too. You know, the Pope of the Jesuit order is called the Black Pope. And this isn't hocus pocus spooky stuff. Okay, this is just the way it is. That's what he's called. Right. And now we have the first Jesuit Pope ever to be elected, which puts a chill through a lot of people's nervous systems because of the implications. That's a tremendous amount of power all of a sudden for the Jesuit order, which has been seen to be up to a whole lot of mischief for many, many, many centuries. To all of a sudden they control the Vatican completely. I have a first cousin who's now deceased, but he was a Jesuit cardinal, so I have some original tapping sources about the teachings of the Jesuits.
Okay,
so did I answer that?
Yes, you did.
A fair answer?
Yes. And we have about 20 minutes, so I just want to push a couple of questions to you before we run out of time. I wanted to ask you, at 60 feet in the money pit itself, they found coconut fibers. And, of course, we know that coconut fibers aren't native to Nova Scotia, Oak Island. So how do you think they got there? And also, what use would they have been? What would they have been used for at the depth of 60 feet?
Well, number one, we know that coconut fibers at 60 feet, at a 60-foot depth, it would not have lasted. Even though they're the most resilient probably of all organic fibers, almost of all organic fibers, they still wouldn't have lasted at 60 feet down for the amount of time it would have taken 60 feet to, overburden that site where the fibers were covered. That does, so it has to be by human manufacture and human hands that the coconut fibers ended up where it ended up. Okay. So what would they have been used for, the coconut fibers? The coconut fibers were found in an area close to or in one of the flood tunnels, which is one of the booby traps at Oak Island. And as a filtering material mixed with other materials that would have kept ocean materials from, also mixing with the water that would have gone into the money pit. So it had coconut fiber had a filtering aspect to it. It also was used to make a kind of caulking material that would seal things, a kind of cement almost. So it was found in that form, mixed with other materials to make
kind of insulation.
No, that's a different use. The insulation is the packing material. Coconut fibers are also used for packing. So let's say we have some kind of really priceless artifact, the Ark of the Covenant, which, by the way, I am not propounding the theory of. Okay, I'm just saying it is a theory. There's a plausibility to it from two sources: the Templars and which we didn't cover, the Phoenicians and their relationship to Nebuchadnezzar and the army. But let's get back to that in a moment.
Right.
The coconut fibers would have been used, for packing, like the bubble stuff we use now to send,
protect the cargo.
Exactly. Or to use as a filtering agent, or to use in a mix for a kind of elastic caulking and covering material. So that what does that say? That's saying that people clearly were using coconut fibers that they can only have gotten from, quite a ways south into the Caribbean from Oak Island. And that implies the treasure ships, because, where if they're using coconut fiber for those purposes, they're getting it from the area where all the great pirates, were found, and all the legends. Yep. All those legends grew from that area south of Oak Island.
Didn't the kids that went there, the 3 teenagers, I can't think of their names offhand, but didn't they think that they were going to find Captain Kidd's treasure there when they were digging initially? I think it was in 1795, I believe.
Exactly, 1795. Yeah, the thing to remember, if I'm right about Phipps putting the gold in 1680, whatever it would be, 1688, 89, into the money pit, it would have been taken out by La Jonquière in 1746. So we have 1746 to 1795. So what the boys saw and described was a bit of an indention, like a sinkhole indention, but with a lot of foliage, with grasses and so on growing on it. It would have had that. There would have been that much time if the last time it was used, and that would have been to bring the gold out. All that got covered over again. So there was enough time for that growth to happen. To just give the image of there being something interesting there. So yeah, they got into all the romantic pirate notions of the Caribbean. The kids did, and one thing led to another. But let's backtrack just real quickly on the this Ark of the Covenant issue, and then the connection between these octagons. The temple was destroyed under Nebuchadnezzar's rule, who was the king of Babylon, in around 587 BC. So if he had the Ark of the Covenant and wanted to hide it, and if he was part of that cabal as well, or some Phoenicians were, and they told him about this place across the Atlantic, so the theory would go, he then enlisted Phoenician shippers to with some of his soldiers to bring it over. That is the only way to account for his role in securing the Ark of the Covenant that early on. The Templar theory is that they found it underneath the Temple Mount, and then they brought it over because they would have had knowledge about this site from being also in and out of that same continuum of secret activity on the part of an ongoing group that by any other name is the same group.
So you think that the Lagina brothers, that's what they're expecting to find out? What do you think they're expecting to find out? They got that series on the History Channel for the last 2 years. I mean, they're putting a lot of investment money. They actually own the island itself. So
they own the tourism company they own the greater number of shares in the tourism company that owns the largest part of Oak Island.
Oh, okay.
There's somebody living, across on the same island who used to be very cooperative with the team that was doing the work before. When David Tobias was there with the Blankenships and so on in the earlier investigations, but they got in a bit of a dispute. Long story there. The Octagon connection is possibly significant when you listen to what Chief Joseph narrates in terms of the oral tradition about those who came to him, gave him that clay tablet and all of that, and that his octagon does not look like the other octagons that the Nez Perce indigenous people used. I've got copies of all of their octagonal motifs. None of them are the Star of Asher. His was. So there's something very strange going on there, and it's very close to the octagon that you might have seen on the episode of the Lagina Brothers' Curse of Oak Island second season, I believe, called the Eight-Pointed Star, meaning an octagon,
like the Star of Asher, similar.
Exactly. Right. It looks an awful lot like it, and it was said to be the main motif of the Mi'kmaq people, and in fact, it is certainly at least one of the main motifs, if not the main motif. So that with the Mi'kmaq plus the reverse, Knights Templar flag, it's kind of a bizarre coincidence, which I don't think it is. And I do think the Templars were here. And if anybody could have come here, it would be the Knights Templar, for the wealth they had, for what they had to secure and hide, and the way they had to, in order to survive, since they were being burned at the stake, for all these, half-invented reasons. It was just jealousy. The kings and the Vatican didn't like the super wealth that the Knights Templar had, had amassed, and so that's what caused the anti-Templar Friday the 13th purge of the Knights Templar. So I think that they were here. I don't think that they were here working against Indigenous people. I think they integrated very well. So I do not think that there's this common theory that has been, no, it's not common, but it's been promoted by someone I know who I've corresponded with, and I don't mean to jump all over him, but I really don't believe that the Templars set out stakes of territory. That this is where there's a fellow who's doing America Unearthed, and he's suggesting that the Templars laid claim to this land and to that, and they left these these memories that were territorial markers, like peeing in the corner. That's not like anything the Templars would do. It indicates a lack of a real tangible sense of the spirit of the Knights Templar. They wouldn't have been claiming other people's land. They just would not have done it. They had so evolved out of the sort of imperial, colonial, missionary, mode that they had initially practiced when they were part of the Crusaders, when they were the first of the Crusaders. But they completely graduated out of that. They got into Islamic mysticism, the Druze, mystical order of Druze, who are said to be Muslim, and they're also said to be Sufis and this and that. They came about. They crystallized in relation to an alliance with the Knights Templar. There's this whole other side of the Templars. If people don't get a handle on, they go off on these kind of wacky, escapades of fantasy. The Templars were so fanciful just by their nature that you don't need to push envelopes about Knights Templar. They were magic entities. They knew things. I've decoded 2 or 3 of their codes that nobody else has been able to crack. One at the part of the Round Church or Temple Church we can get into another time.
Oh yes.
But
Buff, I'm sorry. What about the possibility that Francis Bacon designed the money pit on Oak Island? What do you think about that?
Well, that's what the Francis Bacon Society, believes in London, and I correspond with them. I have a little to do with them. They've been wanting me to speak. They're not sure what venue to put me into, but because I don't abide by their views. Look, Francis Bacon was tied to a man named John Dee. John Dee was a mystic and he invented cryptic forms of writing, and he tutored Francis Bacon how to code, how to write codes, and how to encrypt information. And they are said to have had the Voynich manuscript. So I'm very much interested in Francis Bacon, and I'm very interested in the Francis Bacon Society of Great Britain, and I respect them. And they have a secret about that year 1746 and Alexander von Humboldt that they're flirting with me over. And and so I've decided to do an end run on them and just divulge everything. And now they can deal with it all being out in the open. There is something to it. I'm not of the view that Francis Bacon designed the money pit. I do think it's older, and I think it's been used by successive layering of civilizations and peoples but only the knowledge of which was kept within this one order.
Right.
Again, by any other name, it's the same.
Now, Buff, the stone that was found at 90 feet, because we only have a few minutes left, I just want to get on that stone.
Right.
I believe there's two decipherments. One indicated 40 feet below 2 million pounds are buried. And also Dr. Barry Fell had his own decipherment. Which one do you more or less go towards? Is there any correlation, between the two translations? Like, you know what I'm saying? What do you think about that, to the translations, the decipherment of that stone that was found at 90 feet? I'm sorry.
I am very careful to talk about Barry Fell in public. We already went over him a little bit earlier. Mm-hmm. I wouldn't accept his translation, but he did develop expertise in something called Tifinagh, which is a Berber. Indigenous peoples in North Africa are called Berbers. Berber or Amazite, and Tamazight. They wrote in this form that is all over that artifact. But so is the Cree syllabary. The Cree form of writing is also all over. And if you go to my YouTube channel, the second episode really gets into this part of it, how ancient was the Cree writing form, the so-called Cree syllabary. The whole entire Cree syllabary is on that stone. So here, this goes again to that same point. Why have indigenous people been ignored? They would not have allowed any pro William of Orange, pro Queen Mary, pro King George people to take anything out of the money pit during the period of the Wabanaki Confederacy. They were allied with the French, and they had control over the island. As you heard what I read that my research assistant found, Rodney. There's no question the British were pulling their hair out trying to figure out how to break up this bond that had developed between indigenous people, the French, the Acadians, and the Catholics. That was impossible to separate the components of, and they couldn't, and they had to do genocide, and they had to do these horrible things to. Yep. And that was after 1750 when the worst of it started to happen. So it's time that we get indigenous people back in the center of of all this history, because they were pivotal. They were it all goes back to them. Their oral traditions are records of any stranger people who may have come to, the Americas and brought whatever, including the Ark of the Covenant. Yep. It's very unfair. It remains unfair, and it's ongoing, and it's not recognized in academia how much of this old racism is just continuing. And we'll learn so much more if we can just let it go, abandon it, to bring these people in with all the treasures they have of knowledge and writing forms and all the rest. The ancient Basque syllabary is identical to the Cree syllabary. Why is that? Identical. Symbol for symbol for symbol. It can't have been invented by missionaries, which has been the common view, not held by indigenous people, not held by the Cree, but by everybody else. They bought into the paradigm. It's these paradigms we have to deal with.
Exactly. Well, what you're just so wonderful in bringing these paradigms to perhaps a screeching halt, as they say, by just bringing this in your face kind of evidence. And the more you can get it out there, I think the better off everybody will be.
Yeah, and the creation of the Institute for the Studies of Indigenous Anomalies also. That's going to play a pivotal role, I believe, in the future, in the present and the future. I think what you're doing, Buff, is outstanding. I think that there needs to be a voice of the indigenous peoples, and I hope that the young generation, as well as, of course, the older generation, by traditionally handing down these stories through all this time, it needs to keep going. It's so vital that their voice be heard.
Well, that's why my research assistant, Rodney McLeod, has to be on that path every step of the way with me, And when we go to West Point, when we go to Lagrange, when we go to Oklahoma to get into that Inanna stone, which is phenomenal. I mean, it had a little bit to do with the ultimate breaking of the code of Dilman writing, the discovery of that, because it was just being broken at the time that thing was found. I mean, talk about synchronicity and strange coincidences. That's a huge one. And when you get to Inanna, who is she? She's the mother of that line of goddesses that produced finally Venus. Yep. And you know who Venus is. I mean, morning star, evening star, this wonderful woman whose symbol is the octagon.
And
which brings us all octagonally. Can there be an octagonal circle? Well, kind of, huh?
Yeah, no, every octagon is a circle. All you have to do is connect all 8 angles. Do you know octagony? This is a fun little story. It won't take me more than a quarter of a minute.
Yeah, we have about 4 minutes, Buff.
Okay,
so.
Octa means 8.
Okay.
Gunny, how do you spell knee? You know, the knee on your leg? Spell it.
K-N-E-E.
Okay, do you ever wonder why there's a K there?
Kinda.
Okay, so octagony, kani, right? Gunny means knee in Greek.
Oh my gosh.
A knee describes an angle, usually a right angle if you're sitting down. So you see how this works?
That's lovely. That is that's wonderful. Oh, thank you, Buff.
Okay, Buff, we have a few minutes left, and I just want you to just refresh everyone and give them a little bit insight on this YouTube page, Truth in the Buff, and all the current things that you're going to be doing. So for the next few minutes, maybe you can discuss a little bit of that. Okay, we've posted episode 1 and 2 on Truth in the Buff channel on YouTube, and this deals almost exclusively with Oak Island, but also the associated subjects like the writing forms that have been found in relationship to the Money Pit and Oak Island, the Cree syllabary, for example. So we have an expert on that. Who has proven, he's a doctor and a remarkable person from the United Church, which is the church that is supposed to have produced the missionary that invented the syllabary system, which is such nonsense. And here we have someone coming right out of that saying that is all a bunch of nonsense. So that's in part 2. It's not all of it. It's about a quarter of it, maybe, part 2. Part 3 is going to be the big punchline that I encourage everybody to go to, and I encourage everybody to keep up with the YouTube channel of ours by subscribing as well. There's that option because there's going to be all kinds of other subjects dealt with, including full fleshing out of the octagon, going back to when the octagon, was transmitted from nature to human culture, and why that happened, how that happened, who did it, what is the oldest evidence of all of this, and the salamander story, which is one we didn't even touch on at all, is a remarkable account in history, the relationship of that shape-shifting creature that becomes identified with the seraphim, the order of angels called the seraphim, because seraph meant salamander in its first meaning in Hebrew. And it's described as a salamander, 6 wings. It has these 6 wings that catch oxygen that grow out of the back of its head in one of its 4 cycles, one of its shape-shifted cycles, if you will. I mean, we can go on and on about that. Yeah. Well, actually, Buff, I was going to ask you, maybe you can come back on Epic Voyages down the line, when you have free time, because I know you have a lot going on. And also, you're going over this manuscript that you mentioned earlier. I think you're working on some type of decipherment with a few others. And also, I want to speak about the Da Vinci Code that you were involved with, and as far as we definitely need to speak of that.
My parting words are this. I was recruited into a profiling group in America over a major crime that happened, and there was a Homeland Security officer, 2 FBI agents, two police chiefs out of Missouri. That's all I'm going to say about that.
Yes.
And a lot of other very, very special people. And the Homeland Security guy had also claimed that he broke the code of the Voynich manuscript. And I'm telling you, He didn't. He's proven not to have. We're not on the best of terms with each other, but we are still profiling.
Okay, Buff, I'm sorry to interject, but we got to wrap. I just want to thank you so much for being on with us tonight here on Epic Voyages. It was an absolute pleasure. And
Buff, it was amazing.
Speak with you in the future.
Well, thank you, Carol and Bill, and I look forward to the return.
Okay, thank you, Buff. Have a great night. And I would just like to thank all the listeners for tuning in tonight. And make sure to listen to Epic Voyages every Monday night beginning at 9 p.m. Eastern.
Thank you for being with us tonight. Please join us again next Monday evening for Extraordinary Phenomena Investigations Council's Epic Voyages. I'm Roger Peacock for Epic. Until next time.
The